Boom, we're live. Welcome back, everybody, to another episode of the C Squared podcast. It's been a while since we've last spoken, at least on camera. We've spoken a lot in person because we were both, in fact, playing some tournaments. You've started off with the tournament in Charlotte, US Masters, which you've won. You've joined the live, but for everybody that missed the live, I think it's probably best to start with that one. It's been a very busy period for you, Fabi. How are you feeling? Energy is up. Give us a little bit of insight into that.
Yeah, well, no, it was a tough tournament. Okay, we spoke a bit during, but it was coming off a trip, so I was pretty tired at the start. And it was generally tough because I lost the game, but also in general you have to score many points in an open tournament to fight for first. And when you lose a game, then you basically have to win the rest of the game. So I did manage barely to do that. If I had drawn one game, I would have still tied for first, but obviously, a tie wouldn't have been ideal compared to a win, but okay, it wouldn't have been too bad considering when I lost, I would have been happy with that already. But yeah, I got clear first with 8 out of 9.
That's huge, by the way.
Nicholas,
That's a huge result. A lot of points and a lot of games are needed to be won in clutch situations to score 8 out of 9 when you're facing 25, 50, 2600s, 2600 plus players. It's not easy for everybody that kind of has a grasp of what that means. So, in fact,
yeah, no, it's
this
definitely
was the
not easy.
first,
People underestimate
and this
for
was the
sure.
first open tournament you've played in a long time, at least at that particular level. How did you feel about it?
Yeah, it was the first time in many years. I guess we're not counting the Grand Swiss as an open. I guess
Not
it isn't an
really.
open. It is a Swiss system, and you do have a bit of randomness. But it's not an open where well, yeah, anyone can join, and you might play players who are strong grandmasters, but you might play some 22, 2300s as I faced in the first two rounds, players who were just above 2200 and just above 2300. And then you get the really critical games. Well, I guess they're critical for sure, but the let's say games against the potential winners of the tournament later on, like round 5 and so on, round 6. So when I lost to Nico Theodorou, and he was a point ahead of me, then I was in a situation where at least I felt, and I think that was correct feeling, that I had to win my next game for sure. And I was playing Andy Woodward with Black. So of course playing with Black against quite a good grandmaster. I mean he's very young. He's a strong grandmaster, but he's a young player. He's I guess like 14 or 15.
Exactly. I don't think he's 15
And
yet. He's very young.
yeah, he's very young. So I say decent because he's still quite undeveloped in terms of his chess skills, right? He's strong, he can calculate well, he sees tactics well, all those typical young player things, right? They have a lot of things going for them in terms of that. But but definitely they have no experience and and they they don't have a lot of like understanding of certain positions, just general like opening knowledge that you accumulate over time. A lot of things, general positional knowledge that you accumulate over time is those things that they're lacking. But still, I didn't think it would be an easy game, but I knew that I sort of had to win to fight for first place, and I barely won. I mean, I did trick him at some point with a very nice trick from the opening. Well, I guess middle game, not really opening, but something that I had foreseen in advance, which took him by surprise, and then I was suddenly much better. But it went to an endgame where it was difficult to prove that I'm winning. I mean, I was probably winning objectively, but to prove it was very difficult, and I didn't manage. And then it got to an objectively drawn situation, but still, he was always on the back foot. He was getting low on time. I did get this feeling there were times when he was relaxing a bit, which I think I also sometimes have the tendency to do. Like you've been defending for a long time, but you don't exactly see the immediate danger at that moment. And then you kind of take your take your foot off the pedal for just a second,
Yep.
just mentally. But still, he had like 1 minute. So that whenever you have 1 minute, you basically cannot relax. unless you're a queen up, you can't relax with that amount of time. But I did feel like from his body language, he was relaxing a little bit. And then in a rook endgame, I did manage to win just barely, but I did. And then I won the next two games as well. So the finish was important, and I got clear first because Nico drew his last three games. So he had a very good tournament. He won a lot of rating, performed like 2770, maybe 2780. But um, but those last few games, you even if you're having a very good tournament, if you're drawing, then very often people do catch up, and that's what happens. So
Did you have to
he's
adjust any of your strategies in the opening phase, even in the middle game, compared to what you've usually have been using, let's say in the past many years in closed events when you're playing your peers, players that are 27, 27 plus? And how did you approach that change, if there was a change? And later, I do want to ask you about time control because I think that's quite important. But let's start with that.
I mean the preparation is usually very specific, opponent specific these days. But I did do things that I wouldn't do against players who are close to my rating or players who are like, let's say, over 2700. The other thing was that there wasn't much time for preparation because we played two games a day, one 10:30 in the morning, one 4:45, I think it was. Um, so when you have that schedule, you have like half an hour to prepare, and people play a bunch of stuff. You can't really go too deep. So, but like, let's say in the last round, I'm playing Mark Hyman, and I basically over the board because I didn't expect him to play e4. I just over the board decided to play the Taimanov without like any particular preparation, knowledge of what he's doing, recent like intensive study of the opening, none of that. So I basically just played it because I had the feeling that if it gets to a very sharp fight, then probably I can, or at least I should be able to outplay my opponent, which was barely the case. I mean, it wasn't. It was a very back and forth struggle. But in the end, it did work out. I mean, the issue is that if you play e4, e5, you were somewhat at the mercy of your opponent playing the four knights with d4. Um, there's not really much of a way to avoid this
I guess after
without
knight
playing.
c3, maybe you can go something like bishop c5 or
You can't
some
really
other
play
stuff,
bishop
right?
five. I mean, there's knight takes e5.
Yeah, bishop c5 actually
Um,
is kind of bad. I don't know,
so like
like some
if
random
you
stuff,
want to,
g6 or d6 or this type of
yeah,
things.
g6. I mean, you can do this kind of thing. G6, d4. It's kind of like some.
It's really bad.
Uh, no, it's maybe not like really bad, but white does get simple play, and you do risk quite a lot. So, yeah, unless you're playing someone who you just think that you will outperform them, regardless of the position, even if it's a bad position. But sometimes you can get positions with absolutely no prospects where your opponent's play is easy. They don't have to calculate too much. There's not many tricks. They can play logical, intuitive moves, and they don't really confuse themselves over it. Then, you can get a position where a 2200 will play like a strong grandmaster just because of the simplicity of the position. And yeah, normally what people do is after e4, e5, knight f3. I mean, okay, the Petrov, first of all, anyway, can lead
Good
to the
luck.
four knights, but also it's not really a
Good
winning
luck trying
try.
to win with the Petrov.
Then you have the Philidor. Um, okay, I mean it's pretty passive and not very fun. And then you have knight c6 and then knight c3, and yeah, you basically should play knight f6 here unless you want to get a rotten position. And then white plays d4, and then you take, and then you have like various ways of equalizing. I mean, knight takes e4, for example, equalizes, but it's leading to forced draws. Bishop b4, it's just like white's play becomes so simple. You can look at, for example, how your students, Ishik Khan and Gregorio Parin played in the St. Louis Masters. I mean, white just starts trading off pieces because basically white has the center and black has to at some point liquidate the center, and then everything just gets traded off.
Yeah,
And not only that, it's known by theory. It's just like millions of games of theory there too.
it's too easy. No, against e5 is too easy if white wants to kill the game. Against e5 you can maintain some imbalances in the position, especially if you go to e6 where bishop b5 is no longer a big alternative,
Yeah,
right?
still not easy. I mean, there's a C3 Sicilian.
Of
It
course.
also leads to a situation where pawns in the center get traded and white's play becomes pretty simple.
Yeah.
And there's also an abundance of theory. Like a lot of people play things like the Caracan because you do kind of try to get a structure where the center room remains closed, and then it's a long game. Um, or the French, of course. I mean, I think the exchange French is not like the biggest issue because still the center does remain semi-closed and pieces stay on the board. Like the issue is
But
when you
the problem
have,
with the exchange French, I would say it's also psychological. A lot of players with the white pieces, they just don't want to play it because the simple fact is that if you lose playing the exchange French, you feel like a complete idiot. Especially if you signal the fact that you try to make a draw, especially
I
if
mean,
you're much lower rated than your opponent and people expect you to try to kill the game. You play the exchange French and then your opponent manages to beat you. Then you feel like a complete idiot.
well, if you lose in general, you feel kind of like an idiot, right?
Yes, that's
Everyone
true.
does.
That's true.
No, I mean, also, I think when someone's much, much higher rated than, like, my first round, I was playing a 22, high 2200s player, and it wasn't an easy game by any means. But I did win, right? Like relatively comfortably, but it wasn't an easy game. I wouldn't say. I did have to calculate and did have to spend energy. And after the game, the guy was very happy. He said it was a great game. And I think it's like, people also have their different expectations. So he probably didn't go into the game with expectations that he's fighting for a result, you know?
Yeah.
He just wants to play a close, tight game. Um, but yeah, like the exchange French still a pair of pawns in the center remain and pieces do stay on the board, and you can even have opposite side castling very often. So it's not the most drawish thing. Like I'd rather see the exchange French than the C3 Sicilian because the C3 Sicilian just pawns start to get traded in the center.
For
White plays
sure.
D4, black takes.
For sure.
Black plays D5, white takes, and then you're suddenly left with no center left.
Well, the
And then
problem with the Lapin is that also if you try to stray away from the main lines and the most precise lines, you might end up getting checkmated, right? So you
I don't
generally
even know
don't want
like
to do that.
how do you avoid like okay after C3 for example, knight of six equalizes,
Right.
but like
I guess you
E5,
have
knight
to go
D5, knight of
d5, right? If you want to play for some sort of a
yeah,
big
yeah,
fight
I mean,
or
well,
somewhat of a fight.
D5, yeah, take and D4. And that's when the pawns start to get traded. Like you have an isolated pawn very often, but then white's knights develop to center. White can always play D5 trading off the last central pawn. And then pieces start to get traded off, and then it's just everything is gone. And it's not too difficult for white to play this. Um, so like if black wants to play for a win against the C3 Sicilian, I don't know. I mean, I would probably think maybe D5, and then once white plays D4, you just don't take that pawn, and you try to. I mean, there's a lot of theory, but very often white is taking on C5, and then you have an imbalanced pawn structure. Still not easy to outplay because white's pieces go to such natural squares. It's easy development, but still you have an imbalanced pawn structure, um, and there's chances there. But there's also so much theory behind it. If people play C3 Sicilian, they might just be ready for the main lines like very deeply. And as you said, if you avoid the main lines, then first of all, I don't even know what you're doing, and you're probably playing some crap. Um,
I think there was actually, as we recorded this podcast today, there was a pretty important game in Qatar Masters between Kartikeyan and Tabatabai with the C3 Sicilian. I think people are starting to look into that direction a little bit more carefully, especially
but he
players
won,
that
right?
play. What?
He won.
I actually don't
Kartik.
know the final
No, he
result.
won.
Kartikeyan won,
Yeah, it was due to a blunder near the end of the game.
but he
Kind
got
of a
an
strange
advantage
blunder.
out of the opening, somewhat of an advantage.
Yeah, yeah. I don't know if like I mean wanted to play for a win. Probably he did. I mean, he played definitely not the line where I mean East Knight of six. Um, and then at some point after E5, Knight D5. I mean, this was with E6, Knight of three included. D4, he took D6, Bishop C4, B6, something like this. Like he's just trying to maintain like an imbalanced pawn structure in the sense that white has the advanced e pawn. So This could be good for an attack, but also could be a weakness in endgames, for example. And black has the d5 square as an outpost. So that's a way to try to get a fight. The thing is, he was also playing a very strong grandmaster, so white is not opposed to a fight. So if your opponent wants a fight and you provoke it, then of course you're probably going to get it. I mean, if we're talking purely like my opponent wants to cynically make a draw, then it could be a different story.
Yeah.
But he
Cool.
did end up losing, which not anything to do with the opening, of course. Yeah, Qatar is going on as well. It's interesting. It's one of the typical opens. Everyone has a chance. I mean, not everyone, but there's like a million people who have a theoretical chance of first place.
Right, right. And this is after round 7, but this kind of ties down to especially why you played these two open tournaments, St. Louis Masters, after the US Masters as well. Obviously, the big fight is for the first, in fact, candidate spot, candidates of 2026. It starts already in 2024 because there's two candidate spots that qualify from the FIDE circuit. You're vying for position with Arjun Ervigaisi right now for first position to get that first qualifying spot. And it's kind of an important one. It's a huge one. Obviously, qualifying two candidates is not a guarantee for anybody. You've done it this year, through pretty much any means that you could have done it from. The World Cup, I think the rating, a couple of others. I don't remember exactly. The FIDE circuit, I think he won that as well, or he qualified through that as well.
Mhm.
So
I mean, that's officially how. Oh no, sorry, officially through the World Cup.
it was quite easy, but this is
Gukesh
not a
officially through the
guarantee.
Phoenix circuit last time.
This is not a guarantee. I need to free up a lot of your time and a lot of your energy if you do qualify in 2024. It's a huge race. It's hugely important.